Hi, folks. With Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the interesting phenomenon of barbarian tribes that were invading ancient Rome, coming in through the north of Italy heading towards Rome, and how they were able to defeat the Romans twice in set-piece battles. That is, defeat probably the most professional army, best equipped, best trained, best organized, best led armies in the world at the time. They were able to defeat those even after they'd been defeated themselves everywhere they went. So these barbarian tribes we're talking around 110 BC. So close to 500 odd years before Rome eventually collapsed, or the Western Empire at least eventually collapsed. So these barbarian tribes are being displaced through what at the time we could call a form of mass migration. And so they're being displaced, and they're numbering, I suppose, if you include all the women and hangers-on and everything, probably 1 million people. And wherever they go, they're being evicted. So this is the story. This is being used today to say, well, see, mass migration's always been happening. What's your problem? You fascist Nazi. So about 1 million people, give or take, are supposedly moving from today would be say Western Russia, taking in what today would be sort of around Ukraine, Belarus, around there. And so these people these tribes are moving. By the time they get to northern Italy, they've traveled more than 2,000 kilometers. They've apparently tried to settle in different places, but they've been kicked out. Now, whether they've been militarily defeated on each occasion, that's a bit harder to tell, but that's part of the story. They've been kicked out of all these different places. Or it was because there simply weren't the resources in the area they were moving into, so that no matter whether they displaced the locals or not, there still wasn't going to be enough, farmland and agricultural land and so on to support them, given that agriculture was how it all worked back in the day. So these people, these tribes, so numbering again approximately 1 million, they travel over 2,000 kilometers over a period of years. It's not just one journey, and they arrive in northern Italy. The Romans, as you can imagine, are not thrilled about this, so they want to move these people on as well. We get go wherever you want, but don't hang around here. Now, Rome, the reputation of Rome at the time, Rome's the biggest city certainly in the wider Mediterranean or wider European area. Its legendary wealth is already sort of gets around. The streets are paved with gold and all that sort of stuff. So these tribes think, well, why don't we stay here? This place is so wealthy that there's plenty for us also. Now, remember, back in the day, they come from what we would regard in current times as being almost socialist societies, whereas they kind of share their stuff and they don't have personal possessions in the way that we would see them today. Now, the people would have a personal possession in the sense of their sword or their clothing or something like that, but otherwise they shared what they had. They lived in mud huts and so on. So you couldn't call them an overly sophisticated society. They did have domesticated animals. They did grow crops, and so there was that side of it. But they were nowhere near the level of sophistication of the Romans with the big marble buildings and all the bits and pieces. So nor would they already by that stage, by 110 BC, the Romans had a vast trading network around the Mediterranean basin. They were getting grain from Egypt and olive oil from here and olives from Greece and so on and so forth. So a huge trading network already. And Rome was a very wealthy city with some fantastic buildings and streets and roads that these barbarian tribes had never considered. And the Romans also had an army of great sophistication, certainly relative to anything else going on at the time. But somehow we're supposed to believe that these tribes, these barbarian tribes with no military discipline, with no quality weapons manufacturing facilities, no training, no military organized, none of that. But somehow they're able to appear in northern Italy and defeat 2 Roman armies. So that they're able, their barbarian hordes can do. Now they outnumbered the Romans, but beside the point here, the barbarians were able to defeat 2 Roman armies with great slaughter, and Rome and the Italian peninsula was in an absolute mad panic at the time. Now, there'd been attempts at, I suppose you call them minimal attempts at negotiation, which hadn't worked out. The barbarians now, after having beaten the Romans twice, were feeling pretty smug, and were wanting to dictate terms to the Romans. This is how it's going to be, guys. So anyway, how are we to believe that these barbarians can be defeated everywhere they've gone? They haven't won a single battle, or nothing of note anyway. The major battles they've lost, every single one of them. And yet they're able to come along, the barbarian horde, other barbarians they've defeated, yet somehow they're able to come into northern Italy and defeat the Romans twice. And, that's just inconceivable. The disciplined, well-equipped, superior weapons, everything, the Romans have got the lot, and yet somehow they're beaten twice. Now, maybe the Romans got lazy and thought, we'll beat these guys easily. We can get out of bed late. We can drink lots of beer the night before. Maybe they just got sloppy, but that's unlikely. So what are we looking at here? Were these barbarians really defeated wherever they went, or were there simply insufficient resources wherever they went? So they thought, nah, there's not enough here. There's not enough here for us. Let's keep on going. And maybe even lured by stories and tales and tall tales and myths about how rich Rome was, and those guys have got plenty. Why don't we go and get a piece of that? That may have a similar sort of overtone to it as we see today with the mass migration, all those IQ 70 illiterate peasants that want to come to the West because the streets are paved with gold and so on. And you listen to some of the pathetic sort of Afghan peasants or something today where if I go to the West, they'll give me a free house, and they'll give me a PhD from university. They give me a free car and free everything and a free phone and so on. Maybe not far off the truth, by the way. And so I want to go there. So because those people have so much, if they're giving me all those things, it must mean that they have so much to give away. And they don't understand the ideology that they're being given these things while the local citizens of those countries are being denied the very same things that they're giving to the IQ 70 third world peasants. Nonetheless, coming back to Rome, so I don't buy it that these people were, these barbarians were defeated. They're obviously militarily, reasonably capable. If you can defeat Roman armies back in the day, then you were pretty good, or good enough anyway. So I don't think they were defeated and kicked out of everywhere they went. I just think they moved on, because the resources weren't as plentiful as they wanted or thought they needed, and lured again by the myths and legends that Rome was a place of infinite wealth where, instead of rainwater, you got milk and honey falling out of the sky and these sorts of things. And one assumes their sophistication was at a level where they just, the myths and legends had replaced reality, again, similar to what you would see today. So Rome's in a complete and absolute panic, and twice the Romans have been defeated, and these tribes. Now they've started to move out of northern Italy, and they're heading towards what today is southeastern France, so near what would be the French-Italian border, at a place called Acquisexti. And so now the Romans, again in a panic, they turn to one of the consuls, which is like a sort of a prime minister type sort of equivalent, or similar equivalency anyway. And there were 2 consuls elected each year, but during times of dire emergency, one of those consuls could be elected as dictator for 6 months in order to take the extreme measures necessary to deal with the emergency, in this case Italy being invaded. So the consul was Marius, Gaius Marius, and he was quite a capable general, and made a number, not only at the time but later, made a number of reforms to the armed forces, and he took an army of give or take 100,000 up to northern Italy, and again to this place Acqui Sexti. He was very particular about picking the right battleground and the right time. So he's quite patient, even though some of his junior officers were agitating for let's go and get those bums, and revenge for the 2 defeats run. But Marius kept a cool head and waited for the right location and the battleground and so on, and then issued a crushing defeat, or two actually. So the military power of these barbarians was completely broken by Marius's his tactics and planning and organisation. So he was hailed as a great saviour for the Romans and the Italians in the peninsula breathed a collective sigh of relief, and the barbarians were dispersed, and what remained of them moved on, and so on. Now, it comes back to the original point, though. How are these barbarian tribes with no military discipline, organisation, or sophisticated weaponry, or planning, or leadership, how are they able to defeat the Romans twice? Well, they can't have been that unsophisticated, nor can they have been defeated wherever they went. So militarily, they were reasonably capable. Now, they considered more either total mass, as in troops, soldiers charging in mass, or acts of individual valor. So the idea of being a warrior of great courage or bravery or whatever, and in the same way that fighter pilots, aircraft fighter pilots would be in the 2 world wars, where it would be down to individual combat rather than group combat, this sort of thing. Then that was considered highly, and that worked against them in the end because of the superior Roman organisation. Even so, I don't think that they were kicked out of anywhere. I think they chose to go where they went, and again, their military capability would suggest they weren't getting defeated, unless the tribes they were passing through were of even greater capability, which is very unlikely, because those were the tribes that many of them that the Romans were beating up. Around Dacia or like modern day Serbia and around there. So that's my take on it. That in fact it was a migration for whatever reasons, and these were people just kept on going till they found more plentiful resources, and again were most likely, as I would read it, drawn on by the myths of how rich Italy was. They probably could have settled in these other places. There were some very rich river valleys and things like that where they say, we can do better down there, which again comes back to modern day migration. We need to separate migration where it's sort of forced, if you like, on a people, such as, I don't know, a meteor from outer space strikes through all their farmland, or they in turn are being invaded and the like. But no, these were folks that thought, we can do better down the road, and they're easier pickings, and they went for that. So I don't believe this was a genuine migration. I think it was an early example of attempts at parasitic migration, whereas they've created a wealthy society. Why don't we just go there and take their stuff? And I think that was what that barbarian horde, the Vandals and so on, that migration was about. And they were militarily reasonably capable. If you could defeat Roman armies, you were pretty good. And I think that's what it was. And I think that was probably one of the first mass migrations. And 1 million people moving around. Back in the day when the entire European population was, that was 5% of the European population or something was moving around. So that's a huge chunk of people moving around, again, relative to overall population at the time. So this was mass migration induced by a lust for parasiting off a richer civilization. And I think this was an early example of it, defeated by the Romans and General Marius at Acqui Sexti in 106 BC. You've been at Tacitus today, your Pushback Channel. Thank you for listening.